Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to tackle a big one.
Always. Bring it on.
Today we're diving into the evolution of Western philosophy, and our guide is Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy.
Now that's a classic.
It's a huge topic, but we're going to try to map it out, give you a sense of the key players and ideas.
The goal is to equip you to maybe impress your friends at a dinner party, or, at least spark some interesting conversations.
Exactly. So let's set sail for ancient Greece. Now, most of us have heard of Socrates, Plato, Aristotle.
The big guns.
But before them, we have this fascinating group, the pre-Socratics.
Yeah, real pioneers. They were trying to figure out the universe without relying on myths, some gods.
It's like they were inventing science.
Pretty much.
Russell starts with Thales. He thought everything came from water. What do you make of that?
Well, water is essential for life, right? It changes form. It's kind of everywhere. You can see how he might think it's fundamental.
Yeah, it's a pretty good guess for the time. But then we have Anaximander. He went with something he called the boundless.
Yeah, the boundless, kind of like a primordial chaos, the source of everything, but also undefined,
So already we have a debate. Is it a single substance like water, or something more abstract and mysterious?
Exactly. That's a question that still pops up all the time in physics today. What is the fundamental nature of reality?
And then there's Pythagoras. He added math and a bit of mysticism to the mix.
Pythagoras, yeah. Famous for his theorem, but he also believed that numbers held the key to the universe, the harmony, the structure.
And he believed in the transmigration of souls, right? Like reincarnation.
Yeah. It's an idea that comes up again and again in different cultures, so it must resonate with something deep in human experience.
For sure. Now, let's talk about Heraclitus. You can't step in the same river twice.
Oh, that's a classic. It captures his idea that everything is in constant flux, always changing, nothing stays the same.
Which kind of makes you wonder, is anything permanent at all?
Exactly. He believed that change was the fundamental principle of reality, a constant interplay of opposites,
But then comes Parmenides, and he says change is an illusion.
Ah, yes, Parmenides. He argued for an unchanging, eternal reality. He believed that true being is indivisible and timeless.
So who's right, Heraclitus or Parmenides?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's what makes philosophy so intriguing. We have these two brilliant minds presenting these compelling arguments that seem to contradict each other. It forces us to wrestle with the most basic questions. What is change? What is permanence? What is reality?
Yeah, it's like they set the stage for centuries of philosophical debate.
They really did.
Then we have Empedocles. He tried to find a middle ground with his theory of the four elements.
Right. Earth, air, fire, and water. He thought that these elements combined and separated to create the diversity we see in the world. So maybe there's a way to have both change and some kind of underlying unity.
It's a clever solution.
It is.
And then there were Leucippus and Democritus. They came up with the idea of atoms.
The atomists. They thought everything was made up of these tiny, indivisible particles moving in a void.
It's mind-blowing to think they were exploring these ideas thousands of years ago.
It shows that humans have always been driven to understand the nature of reality, to figure out what things are made of.
So we've gone from water to the boundless to numbers to constant change to an unchanging reality to four elements and finally to atoms.
That's a pretty good summary.
What a wild ride.
And we're just getting started.
I know. But I need a break.
Fair enough. We'll pick it up with Socrates next time.
See you then. Okay, so we're leaving the sunny shores of ancient Greece and moving into a very different world.
It's a different world indeed.
The rise of Christianity and the Middle Ages. It seems like a huge shift.
It is, but those Greek ideas, they didn't just disappear.
So how did pagan philosophy and Christianity come together?
Well, think back to Plato.
Plato, okay.
His idea of perfect forms existing in a separate realm.
Yeah.
That idea resonated with early Christians who were grappling with, the concept of God.
So Plato provided a framework for understanding the divine.
Exactly. And later on, there was this school of thought called Neoplatonism. Thinkers like Plotinus, they explored the idea of an ultimate source of all being.
Sounds pretty mystical.
It was. And it had a lot in common with the Christian idea of God.
So Neoplatonism was kind of a bridge between the two.
Exactly. It helped to kind of merge those two worldviews.
That's fascinating. And then, of course, we have St. Augustine.
Augustine, one of the giants of Christian thought.
His book, City of God, is a classic, right?
It is, and it's a great example of how Greek philosophy and Christian theology could be woven together.
He was dealing with some pretty heavy stuff, though. The fall of Rome, the problem of evil.
Yeah, he was living in a time of upheaval and uncertainty.
So how did he make sense of it all?
Well, he argued that there are two cities. The earthly city, focused on worldly power and material things, and then the heavenly city representing the divine order. Spiritual aspirations.
It's like he's trying to find meaning in the chaos of his time.
Exactly. And he addressed the problem of evil. Why is there suffering in the world if God is good?
Right, right.
He argued that evil is not a thing in itself, it's the absence of good, a corruption of God's creation, caused by human free will.
So it's not God's fault.
That's his argument. And we can't forget the role of the church in all of this. During the early Middle Ages, monasteries became centers of learning. They preserved a lot of ancient texts, including philosophical works.
So even in those turbulent times, the intellectual tradition survived.
It did, and it paved the way for the scholastic period. This was a time of renewed intellectual energy in Europe, and it's when Aristotle, who had been largely forgotten in the West, is rediscovered.
Wait, Aristotle, a pagan philosopher embraced by Christian thinkers.
Yep. You see, the scholastics, they saw the value in Aristotle's logic and his way of understanding the natural world.
So instead of rejecting him, they tried to integrate his ideas into their own theology.
Exactly. The most famous example of this is St. Thomas Aquinas. His Summa Theologica is a masterpiece of scholastic thought. It's an attempt to create a comprehensive system of thought that brings together faith and reason.
So he's saying we can learn from Aristotle without compromising our Christian beliefs.
Precisely. And that synthesis that Aquinas achieved had a huge impact. It shaped theological debates and university curriculums for centuries.
It shows how ideas can travel across time and cultures and find new meanings.
It does.
Okay, so Greek philosophy is alive and well in the Middle Ages. What happens next?
Well, get ready for a big shakeup.
What's coming?
The Renaissance.
Okay, we're in the 17th century now, and the pace of change is picking up.
Yeah, things are really starting to move. We're in the wake of the Renaissance and the scientific revolution, and those Greek ideas we talked about, they're being reinterpreted, challenged.
We've got Spinoza, Leibniz, Locke, Berkeley, Hume. It's a who's who of philosophical heavyweights. So where do we start?
Let's jump in with Spinoza. He had this radical idea that God and nature were one and the same.
So no separation between the creator and the creation.
Exactly. He envisioned a universe governed by a single substance, a kind of all-encompassing divine reality.
It's a pretty bold idea.
It is, and it challenges a lot of traditional religious beliefs. Then we have Leibniz with his concept of monads.
Monads, what are those?
He believed that reality was made up of these fundamental, indivisible units called monads. Each one is like a microcosm reflecting the entire universe.
So it's like each tiny part contains the whole.
Yeah, it's a fascinating idea. It's one way to think about how unity and diversity can coexist.
And then there's Locke. His ideas about empiricism and political philosophy had a huge impact.
Locke was a big deal. He argued that all knowledge comes from experience. We're born with a blank slate, and our senses provide the raw material for our understanding.
So he's pushing back against Descartes and the rationalists.
He is. He's saying, look, reason is important, but it's experience that ultimately shapes our knowledge.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, it's a very influential idea. And of course, Locke's ideas about natural rights, life, liberty, and property, they were hugely important for the Enlightenment and the American Revolution.
Yeah, you can see his fingerprints all over the Declaration of Independence.
Absolutely. But then you have Berkeley, who takes empiricism in a very different direction.
Oh yeah, Berkeley. He's the one who said to be is to be perceived, right?
That's the one. He was a radical empiricist. He believed that material objects don't exist independently of minds.
Wait, so if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it,
It doesn't make a sound.
that's a pretty wild idea.
It is, but it forces you to think about the relationship between reality and perception in a new way.
And then we end this phase of our journey with Hume.
Hume, the great skeptic.
He really questioned everything.
He did. He argued that we can't have certain knowledge about the external world or even about causality.
So how can we know anything at all?
That's the question Hume forces us to ask, and his skepticism had a profound impact on the development of Western philosophy. Okay, we've made it through the 17th and 18th centuries. Are you ready for the 19th and 20th?
Hit me with it. What's next?
Well, we've got German idealism, romanticism, existentialism, pragmatism. It's a century of isms.
That's a lot of isms.
It is, but they're all grappling with the big questions that we've been talking about. Knowledge, reality, meaning, the human condition.
So let's start with German idealism. We've already touched on Kant a bit. How did the German idealist build on his ideas?
Well, Hegel is the big name here. He took Kant's ideas in a very ambitious direction. He developed this complex system of thought.
Okay.
He emphasized the idea of the dialectic, a process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, where ideas clash and give rise to new, more comprehensive understandings. He saw history as this grand unfolding of what he called the absolute idea.
So it's not just about static ideas, but about ideas evolving over time.
Right, it's a dynamic process of growth and development, and he applied this dialectical thinking to history, to politics, to art, to everything.
It's like he's trying to find a pattern in all of human
He
experience.
is, and alongside German idealism, you have the rise of Romanticism.
Ah,
The
romanticism.
Romantics emphasized emotion, intuition, imagination. They were a bit of a reaction against the Enlightenment's focus on reason and order.
Yeah, it's all about feeling and experience.
Exactly. And Schopenhauer, he's a key figure in this movement. He had a pretty pessimistic view of the world. He thought that human life was a constant struggle against this blind, striving force that he called the will.
So, not exactly a happy camper.
Not really, but his ideas about the subconscious and the irrational forces driving human behavior, those were very influential.
And then comes Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, talk about shaking things up.
He's the one who said God is dead, right?
He did, but he wasn't being literal. He was talking about the death of traditional morality, the values that had been rooted in Christianity.
So, what did he propose instead?
He called for a reevaluation of values. He wanted individuals to create their own meaning, to embrace their will to power.
It's a pretty radical idea.
It is, but it was very influential, especially in the 20th century.
And speaking of the 20th century, how can we forget about Darwin?
Darwin's theory of evolution was a game changer, not just for science, but for philosophy, too.
It challenged our whole understanding of humanity's place in the universe.
Exactly. We're not separate from nature. We're part of it, subject to the same forces of evolution.
And then we have Marx. He applied a similar evolutionary framework to history and economics.
Marx argued that economic forces drive historical change. He saw history as a series of class struggles.
And his ideas had a huge impact on the 20th century. Revolutions, political movements, social change. It's a complex legacy.
It is, and one that continues to be debated today. Okay, a few more key figures to round out our journey. We have Bergson, who emphasized intuition and the experience in duration.
Duration.
Yeah, he saw time as this fluid, continuous flow, not the linear, fragmented time of clocks and calendars.
It's about how we actually experience time, right?
Exactly. And then there's pragmatism. William James argued that truth is what works. It's not about abstract ideas. It's about the practical consequences of our beliefs.
So it's about what helps us navigate the world.
Exactly. And finally, we have John Dewey.
Dewey, the education reformer.
He saw education as the key to social progress. He emphasized critical thinking, problem-solving, democratic participation.
It's a fitting end to our whirlwind tour. We've covered a lot of ground from the ancient Greeks to the 20th century.
We have, and it's just a taste of the richness and complexity of Western philosophy.
I feel like I've learned so much, but I also feel like I've just scratched the surface.
That's the beauty of it. There's always more to explore, more to question, more to discover.
So to all of our listeners out there, I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into Western philosophy.
And if you're looking for more, I highly recommend checking out Bertrand Russell's A History of Western Philosophy.
It's a great starting point for anyone who wants to learn more about these ideas and how they've shaped our world. And until next time, keep on questioning and keep on exploring. 8500